When I mentioned how excited I was for my wife's brother's wedding tomorrow, she said, "It was last week," then showed me family photos, all without me. Her sister and parents laughed. "Didn't we tell you?" A month later, when my wife's mom called asking why the renovation payments had stopped, I simply replied, "Didn't I tell you?" You know that moment when your entire world just shifts? Not with a bang, but with a whisper so chillingly indifferent it leaves you breathless? I still remember it perfectly. It was a quiet Thursday evening, nothing dramatic outside, just the mundane clinking of silverware and the low hum of the kitchen fan. I was helping Adeline, my wife, fold napkins, getting ready for what I absolutely believed was her brother Mason's wedding the very next day. I'd even ironed my shirt and polished those old dress shoes I save for occasions that demand forced smiles and small talk. "You excited for tomorrow?" I asked, gently tucking a napkin into a neat rose shape. Adeline just blinked. Like she didn't even understand what I was talking about. Then she tilted her head, narrowed her eyes at me as if I'd just suggested the sky was green, and replied, in the flattest voice I've ever heard her use, "It was last week." My stomach dropped like a stone. What? At first, I thought it was a joke. I waited for the smirk, the sarcastic jab she always followed her pranks with. But nothing came. She just reached for her phone, tapped the screen a few times, and handed it to me without a word. And there it was. Proof. Mason and his bride, Lucy, standing under a wooden arch, surrounded by white roses and soft string lights. Guests gathered by the lake, raising their glasses. There was Mason's best man, her cousin Jace, wiping tears from his eyes. The photographer had done an incredible job capturing everything. And then there was Adeline. My wife. In a deep emerald dress I'd never seen before, hair curled, makeup perfect, smiling like she belonged there. Because she did. Everyone did. Except me. I kept flipping through the pictures, my heart pounding in my chest, desperately searching for a glimpse of myself. Maybe a corner of my jacket in the background. Maybe I'd forgotten I was there? Maybe this was some elaborate test I didn't understand. But I wasn't in a single one. Not a single frame. I set the phone down slowly. My throat felt like sandpaper. I looked at her, still waiting for something. An apology. An explanation. Anything human. She just went back to folding napkins, humming softly, like nothing had happened. Then, from the couch, her sister Mira called out, "Didn't we tell you?" She said it so casually, like someone mentioning the weather. I turned my head to find her scrolling through her own phone, legs crossed, sipping from a glass of red wine, as if we were all just sitting through a boring commercial break. Their mother, Deline, was beside her. She let out a full-bodied, deep laugh that made her shoulders shake. "Oh, goodness, I could have sworn we told you," she wheezed, wiping her eyes with a tissue. No one said sorry. No one even looked concerned. They acted like I was the forgetful one, like it was my fault for not magically appearing at a wedding I was never told about. I stood there, a rose-shaped napkin still clutched in my hand, feeling like the floor had just dropped out from under me. Everything else faded. The hum of the fan, the clink of the wine glass, even the rising tension in my jaw. It was just me and the gut-wrenching realization I had become a stranger in my own house. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't a mistake. This was a message. And it hit me loud and clear, I didn't matter to them. Not enough to be told. Not enough to be missed. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. I just quietly picked up the plates from the table and started placing them in the sink. My hands moved automatically, scrubbing bits of rice and sauce, while my mind stayed stuck on that photo, Adeline smiling beside her brother, like nothing in the world could make that moment better, except, perhaps, my absence. She could have told me. I'd been asking about the wedding for weeks, when it was, what the dress code would be, if I should get a gift for Mason. She always brushed it off, said the plans kept changing, said they were working things out. Lies. All of it. That night, I lay beside her in bed, our backs not touching. She scrolled through her phone until she fell asleep. Meanwhile, I stared at the ceiling, numb. Not sad, not even angry. Just empty. I replayed the last few months in my mind. How often her family made plans without me. How I was left out of group texts. How they scheduled dinners that must have slipped their minds when I asked. How Mira once made a joke about me being the plus one that got subtracted. And I laughed. I actually laughed. Now I knew better. This wasn't carelessness. It was deliberate. I had been erased. What stunned most wasn't even the betrayal. It was the calmness with which they did it. Like it was routine. Like they had done it before. Like I was the only one who hadn't caught on. In the dark, I reached for my phone. I opened the photo again. That emerald dress. That lakeside glow. Adeline smiling without me. I placed the phone face down on the nightstand. And that's when something in me clicked. Not in a loud, vengeful way, but in a cold, quiet whisper, deep in my chest. They thought I'd stay quiet. They thought I'd keep folding napkins. They had no idea. That night, sleep didn't visit me, not even a hint of it. I lay still beside Adeline, who had fallen asleep without a shred of guilt on her face. Her breathing was soft and even, like someone who had nothing to worry about in the world. Meanwhile, I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind circling the same question again and again. How long have I been invisible in this family? I turned to my side, quietly picked up my phone, and opened the gallery where I had saved the wedding photos from her screen. I zoomed in on each one, examining faces, body language, laughter. Everyone looked happy, posed, included. Except me. I wasn't there. Not in any shot. Not in any corner of a reflection. Not in a stray shadow. Because I wasn't invited. Because they had made sure I wasn't supposed to be. They didn't forget. They excluded. And it wasn't just about missing the wedding, that was just the surface. This ran deeper. Much deeper. I remembered the weeks leading up to that date. How I had helped Mason fix his new house. He'd called me about a cracked pipe under the guest bathroom, and I had called in my usual plumber. When the guy quoted him too high, I offered to cover part of it quietly, no big scene. I just wired the difference straight to the company. Then there was the fencing issue. The kitchen tiling. The rewiring of the faulty breaker panel. I had been there every step of the way. I had done it all because family helps family, or so I thought. Now I realized what I had really been, useful. Not loved. Not included. Just useful. Like an app they open when needed and close the second it's done. As Adeline shifted beside me, I studied her silhouette in the dark. She looked peaceful. Like someone who had just hosted a successful event. I wondered if she had smiled while they toasted her brother. I wondered if she had made a speech. Did she mention me? Did she lie and say I was away on business? Or worse, did no one ask about me at all? It made my stomach turn. By 5 a.m., I was up. I moved around the house like a ghost, quiet, invisible, familiar. I made coffee, skipped breakfast, sat at the dining table where we had once shared laughs and plans, and just stared at the empty seat across from me. Then I pulled out my laptop. It wasn't out of revenge, not yet. It was out of clarity. Cold, necessary clarity. I opened my spreadsheets. Line by line, I went through every transaction over the past 2 years. Tens of thousands had gone to Mason's renovation. To Deline's house repairs. A few chunks here and there toward Mira's salon launch, though that business barely lasted 3 months before folding, and no one ever mentioned returning what I gave. I never asked. I never kept score. Until now. Because now it mattered. I looked at the pattern, and a terrible realization hit me. I was more involved in their financial life than their emotional one. I wasn't family. I was infrastructure. That morning, Adeline wandered in around 7, wrapped in her robe, yawning and scratching her head. She smiled when she saw me. "Morning," she said, planting a light kiss on my cheek, like nothing had happened. "Morning," I replied, my voice so calm it surprised even me. She poured herself coffee and sat opposite me. Then she started scrolling through her phone. I watched her for a moment, trying to picture what it felt like to live without consequence. To break someone's trust and then sit beside them like nothing happened. That took a kind of audacity I couldn't understand. "What are you working on?" she asked, without looking up. "Just going over a few numbers," I said. She nodded, uninterested, and moved on. I watched her take slow sips from her cup. That's when I realized something else. She didn't expect me to question anything. Not the wedding. Not the photos. Not even my absence from a day that any decent partner would have been part of. And that's when the quiet started hardening inside me. The kind of quiet that isn't weak. The kind that observes. That calculates. That makes a decision. I didn't confront her. I didn't shout. What good would that do? Her mother would laugh it off. Mira would roll her eyes and say I was being sensitive. Mason would shrug and pretend he had no idea. And Adeline would just blink and say something hollow like, I didn't think it mattered. I had become a ghost in my own marriage. I was present in form, but erased from meaning. So, I decided I would play the part. From that day on, I moved differently. I stopped talking during dinner. She didn't seem to notice. I stopped suggesting family plans. She didn't seem to care. When her mother called and left her phone on speaker, I just listened. I took in the way Deline referred to me like an outsider. *, what does he think about that? *, is he going to pay for it? *, tell him we'll call when we need him. *, they spoke about me like I wasn't in the room. So, I became exactly what they treated me as, unseen. But inside, I was wide awake. I didn't know what I was planning yet. All I knew was something had shifted. Something permanent. And it wasn't about anger. It was about awareness. They had counted on me being dependable, quiet, forgiving, predictable. But that chapter had ended. They just didn't know it yet. It was a sunny Sunday when I made the mistake of driving past Mira's house. I hadn't been invited, of course. I hadn't. But something pulled me that way. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the ache of wanting to believe that I was still part of something. Maybe just foolish habit. I don't know what. What I do know is that as I slowed near her driveway, the same familiar cars were lined up out front, Mira's red coupe, Deline's clunky SUV, Mason's new silver sedan. I recognized all of them instantly, like names on a guest list I was never added to. And through the open windows, I heard laughter. Genuine, easy laughter. I sat in my car across the street and just listened. The clinking of dishes. The sound of chairs scooting across the hardwood floor. Someone turning up music on a Bluetooth speaker. Bacon. I could smell bacon from my window. I'd cooked it for them before. Mira liked hers crispy. Deline always scolded me for burning the edges. I used to think that meant she cared. But that morning, sitting there in a car I paid for, parked near a home I helped renovate, something cracked in me. They were celebrating again, together, and once again, I was the ghost they never spoke of. I stared at the sidewalk for a long time. People passed by, walking dogs, pushing strollers. Normal life kept moving, while I sat in the middle of it, paralyzed by the truth that had been growing louder with each day. They never considered me family. I was the man who paid. That's it. Mira's husband, Grant, had called me 3 months ago when their hot water heater burst. Said he didn't know who else to call. I had a guy there in an hour. Paid the bill, too, because Grant said he was waiting on a client payment and Mira was stressed. Then there were the new windows at Deline's house, the old ones had leaks. I'd arranged the contractor and wired the deposit myself. No one thanked me. They acted like it was expected. Like breathing. And I let them. I didn't want to admit that. But sitting in that car, watching Mira's front door swing open to reveal trays of food and happy people with wine glasses, I understood what I had become. I wasn't a member of their circle. I was a resource. A backup plan. A wallet that smiled. And they didn't even have the decency to pretend otherwise. I drove off in silence, passing by familiar streets, landmarks that used to make me smile, like the bench Adeline and I once sat on after our first real fight. Now everything felt hollow. Every corner had a memory that had been edited, bleached of warmth. When I got home, I didn't go inside right away. I stood in the driveway, hands in my pockets, looking at the house I once thought of as ours. But even it had started to feel borrowed, temporary, like the key in my hand unlocked something I no longer had a place in. I walked through the door quietly. The living room was empty. A pile of shopping bags sat near the stairs. Adeline must have gone out with Mira the day before, probably shopping for Mason's housewarming, or something equally meaningless. I didn't ask. I didn't want to give her the opportunity to lie. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water, went into the study, and called Theo. Theo and I had been friends since college. He was a lawyer now, sharp, precise, and more loyal than anyone I'd ever met. He'd been the best man at my wedding, though no one from Adeline's side ever really warmed up to him. Too blunt, they said. Too serious. But I'd take blunt over fake any day. Long time, he said when he picked up. Everything all right? No, I said. But it will be. He didn't press. Just waited. I told him everything. About the wedding, the laughter, the photos. About sitting outside Mira's brunch like an idiot, hoping someone might call. I told him about the money, the repairs, the family that had silently cut me out while still dipping into my pockets like it was tradition. There was a long pause on his end. Then he asked, "You want out?" I didn't answer right away. I stared at the window beside me, watching a squirrel run along the fence line. "No," I said. "Finally, I want silence." He was quiet for a moment. Then said, "You don't want to confront them?" I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "They don't deserve confrontation. They'll spin it. Laugh it off. Twist my words. I just want silence. Clean, cold silence." "I can do that," he said. "But silence is a powerful tool. Once you go that route, you can't shout later." "I don't want to shout," I replied. "I want to vanish. But I want them to feel it." Theo exhaled. "All right. Let's get to work then." We discussed accounts, transfers, and how to quietly untangle myself from every financial thread connecting me to the Andersons. I'd kept everything in my name or my holding company, but I'd never enforced boundaries. That was about to change. We drafted the first set of documents that night, and when I hung up, I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel grief. I felt something better, clarity. I walked back into the living room and found Adeline on the couch, phone in hand, laughing softly at something Mira must have said. She looked up and smiled. "You okay?" she asked, like nothing had changed. I nodded. Then I looked at her and saw a woman who believed I would always be here. A man who would always pay, always support, always stay. And in that moment, I finally understood, they didn't erase me because they hated me. They erased me because they thought I would never leave. The following Monday, Theo and I met over breakfast at a quiet little diner outside the city. It was the kind of place where nobody asked questions and everyone minded their own business. I didn't want to meet in a law office or a boardroom. I didn't want this to feel like a war, just like a decision, a correction. Theo brought a folder with him. Inside were the documents I needed to sever the quiet chains I had spent years wrapping around myself. He slid the folder across the table with his usual no-nonsense expression. "It's all here," he said, tapping the cover. "Renovation payouts, property maintenance grants, discretionary contributions. Every last one of them routed through your personal holding firm. You've been a generous man." I opened it and skimmed the pages, contracts, authorizations, amendments. I had signed without thinking twice because family needed help, because I believed helping them made me part of something. "I want it all paused," I said quietly. "Every cent. Every automatic payment. I don't want a single light bulb changed unless they call me personally." Theo nodded. "I'll get the order signed today. And I've set up alerts in case they try to go around you." I sipped my coffee slowly, thinking of the look that would cross Delaine's face when the plumber said, payment never came. The confusion in Mira's voice when the contractor refused to continue fixing the patio. The moment Adeline would try to spin it into another technical mix-up. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Later that afternoon, I sat at my desk in the study and began removing myself from every informal tie I had to them. I called the gardener who maintained Delaine's lawn and told him not to expect next month's payment. I emailed the property insurance rep and revoked the coverage extension I'd added for Mira's leaking ceiling. I didn't explain. I didn't make excuses. Just a line here, a cancellation there. Silent redirection. And then, I waited. It took 5 days. On the 6th morning, I was having coffee on the porch when my phone buzzed. Delaine's name lit up the screen. I stared at it, let it ring until the final chime, and then picked up. I wasn't angry. I wasn't curious. I just wanted to hear how she would spin it. "Hello," I said, as calmly as if she were an old coworker calling to check in. "Oh, thank God," she sighed in that over-the-top voice of hers. "Darling, I just got off the phone with that terrible builder. He said the kitchen work's been stopped, something about funds not going through." I said nothing. I told him that must be a mistake, of course. "I mean, you've always handled these things. Is it a bank issue?" I leaned back in my chair, staring at the wind chimes Adeline had bought 2 summers ago. They clinked softly in the breeze, like they were mocking her mother's voice. "No mistake," I said plainly. A beat of silence on the other end. I'm sorry," she said. I gave a quiet chuckle and replied, "Didn't I tell you?" I repeated it slowly, gently, with the same emptiness her daughter had once offered me across our kitchen table. "Didn't I tell you?" She paused. I could hear her trying to decide whether to laugh again, whether this was some odd joke she didn't quite get yet. But I didn't wait for her to find footing. "I'll let you sort it out with Mason or Mira. I'm sure they've got it handled." Then I ended the call. It wasn't slamming a door. It was turning off a light. Later that day, Mira texted me. Just 2 words, payment issue. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the filing cabinet and pulled out the folder labeled Anderson Affairs. Yes, I had finally started naming things properly. I placed their folder beside others, business accounts, real estate ventures, trusts. I looked at them all and realized something stunning. Every person in that family had benefited from me. Everyone. And not once did they treat me like I belonged. For dinner that night, Adeline made pasta. I could hear her humming while she stirred in the kitchen. She didn't ask how my day was. She didn't mention the calls. She didn't seem to know her mother had been cut off, or that Mira was now pacing in her living room. She asked about the weekend. I said I'd be working. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. The next evening, I came home to find her mother and sister sitting in the living room. Deline stood the moment I entered, like a politician pretending to welcome an old ally. "Oh, good, you're home," she said, her voice strained with something she didn't know how to hide: fear, confusion, entitlement. All of it. Mira gave me a small wave. "We thought we'd come talk in person. Sort things out." I didn't sit. I walked to the hallway table, pulled out the envelope I had prepared earlier, and handed it to Deline. She opened it right there. Inside was a packet of itemized receipts, contractor logs, maintenance records, everything I had paid for over the past 3 years. Every leak, every wall, every nail. "This," I said, "is what humor used to cost me." Her eyes darted across the pages, realization dawning like thunder. "I didn't keep score before," I continued, "because I believed I was part of this family. I thought love was a shared thing. But it turns out it was just a tab I didn't know I'd opened." Deline tried to speak. I didn't let her. "And now the account is closed." I turned and left the room, walked straight upstairs, and shut the door behind me. I didn't hear them leave. I didn't care. For the first time in years, the house was finally quiet. Not empty. Not tense. Just quiet. And I liked it. Adeline tried to act like nothing had happened, as if her mother and sister hadn't just sat in our living room clutching receipts like they'd never seen accountability before. As if I hadn't just laid out the truth in black and white. She cooked dinner that night. Lemon chicken with roasted potatoes. That was her peace-offering meal, the one she used when she sensed tension she didn't want to talk about. But I wasn't hungry. Not for food. Not for another round of emotional amnesia. "You've barely touched your plate," she said, cutting into her chicken. "I'm not hungry," I answered, without looking up. She put her fork down. "You could have told me you were cutting off the payments. You could have told me about your brother's wedding," I said quietly, still not looking at her. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. I saw it from the corner of my eye, that moment when someone considers whether lying is still worth it. But for once, she didn't deny it. She just sighed, picked up her glass of wine, and drank. "It was a misunderstanding," she murmured after a while. "It wasn't malicious. You're reading into it too much." I turned to her. "A misunderstanding is forgetting to grab milk on the way home. Not erasing your husband from your brother's wedding." She flinched. And for a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, there was something close to shame in her face. But it passed quickly, replaced by that calm, practiced indifference. "You're being dramatic." There it was. The words didn't sting, not anymore. I'd already bled dry. Now I was just walking through the ashes. "I'm moving into the guest room," I said calmly. "Starting tonight." Adeline didn't react immediately. She just stared at me like I had said I was changing the curtains. "Seriously?" she said after a moment. "You're going to sulk around the house like some ghost?" I stood up, picked up my half-full plate, and walked it to the sink. "No. I'm going to live like someone who's finally woken up." That night, I moved my clothes downstairs. The guest room was small, but it was mine. I changed the bedsheets, cleaned out the drawers, and for the first time in months, slept without the weight of pretending. The days after, they were quiet. Not in the peaceful sense, more like the quiet of a battlefield after the smoke clears and everyone's waiting to see who moves first. I kept to myself, cooked my own meals, did my own laundry. When Adeline left for work, she stopped announcing it. When she came home, she'd glance at the guest room door like it offended her by existing. I didn't care. I was no longer interested in making her comfortable with what she had done. A week passed before she tried to press reset. One evening, I heard the clinking of glasses and the sound of her voice calling out to her mother. Apparently, they were coming over again. This time, to talk things out over wine and dessert. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten to leave. I just stayed in my room, listened. Deline opened with a joke, of course. Something dry and layered with condescension. I always knew you had a dramatic side, she said through laughter. You should have been in theater. Maybe then you'd be too busy to cut off our roof repairs. Adeline laughed with her. Mira joined in from the kitchen, chiming something about how I must be going through a midlife ego crisis. I walked out of the guest room, slow and quiet, and stepped into the hallway. None of them saw me at first. Then Deline turned, smile still plastered on her face, until she saw what I was holding, an envelope. Another one? She rolled her eyes, still playing the role of the amused matriarch. Is this another bill breakdown, sweetheart? No, I said. This one's on the house. I walked to the coffee table and placed it down between the wine glasses. Inside were not receipts this time, but copies of emails, screenshots of text messages, correspondence between contractors I had paid and her family requesting extras. Spa-like upgrades. Fancy lighting. Unnecessary additions that ballooned costs because, in Mira's words, asterisk he's good for it. Asterisk this, I said evenly, is what entitlement looks like in writing. The laughter stopped. Even Mira stopped stirring her drink. Deline opened the envelope, pulled out the pages, and went silent. I looked at Adeline. She was frozen, her hand still holding a spoon over the dessert bowl, unmoving. I didn't come out here to argue, I said. I didn't come to reclaim anything. I came to remind you that I was never invisible. You just chose to look past me. Then I turned and walked back to my room, left them in their designer clothes, surrounded by half-eaten tiramisu and sour wine. They didn't follow. Later that night, I heard them leave, doors closing harder than necessary, tires screeching down the street. Adeline didn't come to the guest room. She stayed upstairs, maybe crying, maybe stewing. I didn't check. I didn't care. Something strange happened after that night. I began to feel lighter. Not happier, not yet, but freer. There's a kind of peace that comes when you stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. I started working out again, waking up early, reading books I'd left gathering dust on the shelf. My mind felt clearer without the emotional weight of constantly waiting for validation. Then one day, I got an email from a contractor I hadn't heard from in months, someone Deline had referred for Mira's second renovation attempt. Hey, it read, just confirming you'd be covering the new tile job too? I replied with 2 words, not involved. Silence. Sweet silence. From that point on, I stopped bracing myself for the next manipulation, the next insult dressed as a joke, the next request laced in fake warmth. I knew what I was now. I was no longer the man who pays but isn't family. I was the man who remembers everything and forgets nothing. I left the house before sunrise. Not out of anger. Not to make a scene. Just a quiet decision after too many days of watching my own reflection fade in a home I no longer recognized. I had packed a small duffel bag the night before, a few shirts, a laptop, my documents, and the spare keys to a condo I bought 5 years earlier, back when I still believed in the concept of future-proofing my life. The condo sat on the 9th floor of a high-rise on the quiet side of the city. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the skyline, and the one thing I hadn't realized I missed until I opened the door, space to breathe. The silence there was different. Not the tense kind that sat between 2 people in a house that had grown too big with emotional distance. No, this silence was clean. It was mine. I dropped my bag, exhaled, and let the weight of months fall off my shoulders all at once. For the first time in years, I was alone with my thoughts, and they weren't screaming. Adeline didn't call. Not that day. Not the next. Maybe she assumed it was another phase, a silent protest that would end with me crawling back to her side, like I always had. Or maybe she simply didn't notice. I wasn't sure which truth hurt more. 3 days passed before my phone buzzed. It was Mira. We need help finishing the foundation work at Mom's place. You know, she's getting older. This delay is stressing her out. No hi. No how are you? No acknowledgement of the last conversation. Just another request. Another assumption. I stared at the message for a few seconds, then tapped the call button. She answered on the second ring, as chipper as ever. I knew you'd call back, she said with a smug little laugh. Seriously though, the builder is being difficult. He says without a new deposit he won't finish. I'm sure Mason can handle it, I interrupted calmly. There was a pause. Mason? She asked. But he had a lovely wedding, I continued, didn't he? She didn't speak. I let the silence stretch. I wanted her to feel what I had been feeling for months, that tight, sinking quiet when someone forgets you on purpose. When they leave you behind and pretend it was an accident. The line clicked. She had hung up. I smiled. Not a cruel smile, just one of realization. The thing about silence is that once you stop feeling it for other people, it becomes a weapon they don't know how to defend against. They're used to your yes, your convenience, your explanations. When those disappear, so does their control. Days passed. No more calls from Mira. No texts from Deline. Not a single word from Adeline. And for once, I didn't wait by the phone. Instead, I worked. I set up my desk near the window. I opened projects I'd been meaning to start for years. I cleaned up my inbox, caught up with old clients. I even reached out to a few nonprofits that had been sitting on my radar. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about living in my own name again. I cooked my own meals, played jazz in the mornings, and sometimes just sat in silence, staring at the skyline, thinking about nothing in particular. That, to me, was the greatest shift. I wasn't constantly rehearsing arguments in my head anymore. I wasn't defending myself to ghosts. One afternoon, I walked to the cafe down the street. A new barista named Jen took my order. She smiled when I told her my name, scribbled it on the cup, and said, "Nice to see a regular face." "Most folks around here just glare at their phones," I said. Trying not to be one of them anymore. She grinned. "Good luck." That night, I checked my phone again. Still nothing. But it didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like peace. And just when I thought they'd finally decided to leave me be, Deline called again. This time her voice was different, edgy, forced calm wrapped in panic. "The roof is leaking," she said without preamble. "The builder is threatening legal action." What is going on? I looked out my window at the city lights and sipped from my mug before responding. "I'm sure Mason or Adeline can help," I said, mirroring her own dismissiveness. "They said it was your responsibility," she snapped. And there it was. The truth they'd never admit openly, I had been the backbone of their comfort. The unspoken agreement was that I would pay, fix, provide, protect, and ask for nothing in return. "Didn't I tell you?" I said softly. "What?" I let the words sit. Let her feel the same chill I'd felt when her daughter showed me wedding photos I didn't know existed. Let her choke on the same emptiness I'd swallowed for years. "Didn't I tell you?" I repeated. And then ended the call. An hour later, Adeline finally broke the silence. She didn't call. She came. I heard the knock at my condo door around 9:15 p.m. When I opened it, she stood there in a coat too thin for the cold and eyes red like she hadn't slept. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered. I stepped aside, but didn't say a word. She walked in slowly, looking around like she was seeing me for the first time in years. "This place is nice," she said, voice small. I nodded. She sat down on the edge of the couch, twisting her hands together. "This is your family too," she said, barely above a whisper. "You can't just leave them like this." "No," I said, standing near the window. "Family doesn't erase you from photos or celebrations or homes." She looked down at her hands. "I made a mistake," she said. "I didn't think it would matter." That hurt more than anything. "You didn't think it would matter," I didn't reply. She looked up. "Can we talk?" I let the silence answer. And for the first time, she sat in it. No defenses. No jokes. Just her staring at a version of me she hadn't met before, the one who wouldn't carry shame that didn't belong to him. When she finally stood up to leave, she turned to me. "Do you still love me?" I looked at her, long and steady. "I love who I used to be when I was with you. But I don't miss who I became." She nodded, eyes welling up, and left without another word. And I returned to my silence. Not because I was broken, but because I was finally whole. When people underestimate you long enough, you stop correcting them. You let them believe what they want. That's what I did for years. The Andersons treated me like I was just an IT consultant, just another tech guy who got lucky marrying into their family. They never asked deeper questions about what I did, how I built my business, or why I never seemed to stress about money. They weren't interested in my world, just in what I could offer theirs. That suited me fine. Because the less they knew, the more control I had. They didn't know I owned the consulting firm I worked at. They didn't know I'd purchased rental properties across the city through a holding company with a generic name they'd never recognize. They didn't know that half the people they gossiped about at brunch, landlords, HOA board members, building inspectors, had my number saved in their phones. And they had no idea that Deline's beloved house, the same one I helped save from foreclosure 5 years ago, was still tied to a lien I held quietly, legally, and indisputably. Back then, Mason had gotten himself into some gambling trouble. He asked his mother for help. She, in turn, asked me. The house was at risk, and they needed a cosigner to keep the second mortgage from collapsing. I didn't ask questions. I just signed. Of course, I made sure the paperwork protected me. A quiet clause in the agreement allowed me to convert the lien into an enforceable debt if certain conditions weren't met. They weren't. Not by a long shot. And now, as I sat in my condo, watching the evening traffic drift like ants below, I realized I was holding something far more powerful than anger, leverage. Theo came over that night. He had a thick folder with him, updated LLC records, new legal notices, and a summary of every transaction we were moving under private control. This one, he said, pointing to the page with Deline's property, is your ace. The city inspector's report is enough to trigger the debt clause if you wanted. We could move to seize equity within 30 days. I didn't smile, not out of restraint, but because there was nothing to gloat about. I don't want the house, I said. Theo raised an eyebrow. Then what do you want? I want them to feel it, I said quietly. I want them to know what it's like to live with the sound of a door closing in their face. He nodded. He understood. We finalized the documents. My ownership's now public. My involvement now official. All renovations routed through my firms cancelled. All scheduled maintenance plans revoked. They'd have to go through new inspections, new estimates with contractors who didn't know them, and certainly didn't care about their last name. The Anderson family facade, polished smiles, borrowed charm, whispered judgments, was beginning to show its cracks. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't announce anything. I just let the systems do what they were designed to do. A week later, I got an email from a property manager confirming cancellation of the upcoming roofing work for Ms. Anderson's residence. Client unable to verify authorized payment source. A day after that, Mira's name popped up on my phone. I let it ring out. Then she sent a voice note, "You really think this is funny?" Mom's stressed out of her mind. The new contractors are asking for upfront deposits we can't cover yet. You know how long it takes to get approved for a new loan? You're making this harder than it needs to be. I played the message twice. Not because I was unsure of her tone. I just wanted to hear how deeply she believed I still belonged to their service. A few hours later, Mason texted, "Not sure what's going on with Mom's house. Can we talk?" I didn't reply. That night, I received a message from someone I didn't expect, Lucy, Mason's wife. We'd never been particularly close. She was always pleasant, always neutral. I used to think it was because she was shy. Now I realized she was just observant. She hadn't joined the laughter when I was erased from Mason's wedding. In fact, I barely saw her in the photos that Adeline showed me. Her message was short, "I'm sorry. I didn't know. If I had, I wouldn't have gone through with it. You deserved better." I read it twice, then locked my phone. The next day, I stopped by one of the properties I owned in the Eastwood district. It was an apartment complex with 12 units and a management team that answered directly to me. I stood in the courtyard for a while, listening to the sound of kids playing nearby, watching tenants go about their evening routines. It reminded me of how much I'd built quietly, carefully, while everyone else was busy judging appearances. I was investing, protecting, preparing. I remembered a night years ago when Deline had joked that I wasn't ambitious like Mason, that my job was cute but not impressive. I had laughed then, shrugged it off. But now, as I stood on the balcony of my own building, I realized I wasn't the quiet one. They were the blind ones. And their ignorance had been the greatest gift they ever gave me. A few days later, Theo called. "They got the letter," he said. "Deline's hired a new attorney. She's panicking, trying to renegotiate terms on the lien, and she can't. You gave them 5 years of goodwill. You're within your rights." I exhaled. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vengeful. I was just done. And being done is one of the most powerful feelings in the world. I ended the call and looked around my condo. The light was soft through the windows. The air was clean. My inbox was quiet. My conscience even quieter. They could keep their laughter, their brunches, their weddings. I had my name. I had my voice. And finally, I had my peace. It happened faster than I expected. The unraveling. The chaos. The slow, public exposure of everything they tried to keep wrapped in artificial grace. It started with a voicemail from Deline. Shaky. Out of breath. And no longer laced with superiority. I need you to call me back, please. The new builder's threatening legal action. Says we defaulted on the revised contract. I didn't even know there was a new contract. They said it was under your name. She sounded like a woman who had lost control of the narrative, and for the first time, I didn't. I never called her back. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I needed to protect myself from becoming their crutch again. That same day, I got a text from Adeline. It was long. Too long. I didn't even read it all the way through, just skimmed over phrases like, I didn't know it would get this bad, and there's still family, and we shouldn't let money destroy everything. Money didn't destroy anything. Silence did. Entitlement did. The belief that I would never push back did. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by my window. Below, the city moved on, without any awareness of the storm circling the Anderson name. The same people who once laughed behind my back were now realizing that they had built their comfort on foundations they didn't own. A few days later, Adeline showed up again. She didn't text. Didn't call. Just knocked. I saw her through the peephole, hair tied back, no makeup, wearing the navy blue sweater I bought her 3 birthdays ago. I opened the door slowly. She didn't say anything for a few seconds, just looked at me, searching. Can I come in? She asked. I let her. She sat on the edge of the couch, like she had during her first visit, only now her shoulders slumped with something heavier. We're in trouble, she said. I know, I replied. She glanced up at me, surprised I wasn't offering comfort. I didn't move to sit beside her. I stayed standing. They're falling apart. Mom can't refinance the house because of the lien. Mira's business partner backed out. Mason and Lucy are fighting almost every day. It's like everything is just breaking. I nodded. Because it was never built properly. She blinked, stunned at my calm. I didn't come here to beg, she said finally. I just needed you to know that it's not all jokes and brunches anymore. We're dealing with real things now. Good, I said. Real things are overdue. She flinched a little. You think we deserve this? I think consequences are part of adulthood, I answered. And I think when you leave someone out repeatedly, cruelly, carelessly, you don't get to act shocked when they stop playing their part. She went quiet again. I came to ask for dinner, she said finally. Not a favor. Not money. Just one dinner. Just to talk. I tilted my head, studied her for a second, and then said, I'll think about it. The next day, I didn't go to work. I took the morning off and drove past Mira's salon. It had a big for lease sign taped on the glass. I parked and stepped out just to get a closer look. The space was empty now. Chairs gone. Reception desk removed. A faded poster of Mira still hung in the corner window, smiling beside a curling iron and the slogan, Confidence starts here. Ironic. I stood there for a moment, then got back into my car. Later that afternoon, I stopped by one of my commercial properties. Theo had arranged a meeting with a new tenant, an up-and-coming design firm looking for office space. I toured them through the building, shook hands, negotiated with a clear mind. It felt good. Clean. Purposeful. After they left, I checked my phone, 3 missed calls from Adeline and 1 voicemail. I hesitated, then hit play. I know you think I don't care. I know you think I was part of everything that happened. But I wasn't trying to hurt you. I didn't want to rock the boat. I thought it was easier to let things slide, and now everything's capsized, and I get it. Maybe I deserve this, but I do miss you. I miss how you used to take care of everything. I miss who we were before all of this. I deleted the message. Not out of spite, but because I didn't want to carry her longing when she had never carried mine. That night, I cooked for myself. Steak, roasted garlic, sautéed vegetables. I set the table, lit a candle, ate slowly, savoring the silence. Not as punishment, but as presence. My presence. I remembered how many dinners I had spent surrounded by people who looked through me. How many events I had paid for but hadn't been welcomed at. How many laughs were shared at my expense while I smiled politely and poured the wine. No. Now I was alone, and it was the most peace I'd known in years. The fall of the Anderson family facade wasn't loud. It didn't come with breaking headlines or dramatic public arguments. It came in quiet losses, cancelled projects, frozen accounts, failed loans, broken relationships. Things they'd taken for granted slowly slipping away. And not once did I have to raise my voice. They unraveled themselves. I just stopped holding the thread. The news came through a friend I hadn't spoken to in months. His name was Ray, and he used to be Mason's coworker, one of the few decent people in that circle who had eyes, ears, and a conscience. He called one afternoon while I was reviewing lease renewals in my condo office. "You hear what happened with Mason and Lucy?" he asked. "No," I replied, already knowing it wouldn't be good. "They're separated. She moved out last weekend, took all her stuff, and went back to her sister's place. Told everyone at brunch it was because of what happened with you. Said the family's treatment of you made her sick." I blinked, sat back in my chair. "She said that?" "Word for word," Ray said. "Apparently she didn't even know about the wedding stuff until someone brought it up at a dinner. When she found out you weren't invited and the way they laughed about it, she lost it. Said, if they could do that to you, they could do it to anyone." I didn't say much after that, just nodded, thanked him for the call, and hung up. It should have made me feel victorious. It didn't. All I felt was confirmation. Confirmation that I had never imagined the cruelty. That I wasn't overly sensitive. That the quiet way I'd been pushed aside was, in fact, real and visible to others. I went for a walk that evening. The streets were lit with that soft, golden hour hue that makes everything look cinematic. People walked their dogs, a couple laughed outside a bakery. Life moved on. My heart felt oddly still. Mira got engaged around that same time. Word spread quickly. She posted it all over social media, close-up shots of the ring, long captions about love and second chances. But what stood out wasn't the announcement, it was the silence that followed. No one offered to pay for her venue. No one offered to host. Even Deline, once the queen of arranging events for her children, was suddenly occupied with repairs and contractor disputes. The financial safety net I had quietly provided for over 5 years had vanished, and with it, their image of effortless stability. A week later, Mira called me. I didn't answer. She texted instead, "I just want to know if we can be civil. I'd still love to have you at the wedding. You're important to us." I read it. Deleted it. I wasn't angry, just done. That same night, I received one more message from Adeline. It wasn't long. "I miss how you used to take care of everything." That line hung in my chest longer than I wanted it to. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't accountability. It was nostalgia, selective and convenient. She missed the ease I created, the invisible scaffolding I built around all of them so they could shine while I faded. I didn't respond. Instead, I stood by the window and looked out at the city again. Every time I did, it reminded me of who I was outside their orbit. A man who could build, protect, think, provide. Not because it was expected, but because it was who I am. They never really knew that man. They only knew the quiet husband, the predictable provider, the man who folded napkins and laughed when they joked at his expense. I was not that man anymore. And strangely, I felt sorry for Adeline. Because she was mourning the wrong thing. She thought she missed me. But what she really missed was control. 2 days later, I got a call from Theo. "Thought you'd like to know," he said. Deline's attorney reached out. "She's trying to settle the lien out of court. They're terrified the house will be listed." "Let her sweat," I said. "She already is." We shared a quiet laugh. Then he said something that caught me off guard. "Ever thought about letting go entirely?" I paused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, the paperwork's done. You're protected. Their access is cut. You've made your point. Do you want to stay tethered to any of it? Or do you want to walk away clean?" I didn't answer immediately. That night, I sat alone on my balcony, the air cool and still, and really thought about it. For the first time since this began, I considered what it would feel like to stop. Not just responding, but remembering. Not just defending, but detaching. To stop letting them rent space in my mind. To let the chapter close. No final paragraph. No dramatic ending. Just a silent page turn. It felt possible. And that was enough. So when I woke the next morning, I called Theo back. "Start the process," I said. "All of it. Cut the lien. Finalize the property transfers. Close out anything still tethered to their names or their chaos. Let them live in the world they created without me. Because that's what they chose. I was just honoring it. It's been almost a year now. A full turn of the calendar since the day I stood in my own kitchen and was told, without hesitation, without apology, that my wife had attended her brother's wedding without me. A year since Mira laughed from the couch and asked, "Didn't we tell you?" while her mother sipped wine like I wasn't standing in the room. A year since I folded napkins with hope in my chest and went to bed with silence in my lungs. And now? Now I live in a home that I chose. Every piece of furniture was handpicked by me, not bought to impress anyone or match someone else's idea of elegance. My mornings start with peace. My nights end without noise. I don't check my phone bracing for another passive-aggressive text. I don't carry invisible debts for invisible roles in a family that never truly welcomed me. I carry only myself. And that has been enough. The condo, my condo, has become something I didn't know I needed. A refuge. Not from the world, but from the version of myself I used to be. The man who explained too much, gave too much, waited too long for people who would never clap when you walked into a room. The silence is no longer a wound. It's a wall I built, brick by brick, to keep out noise I no longer accept. Last week, I hosted dinner. A small one. Nothing extravagant. Just a few people I trust. People who never made me prove my worth. Theo brought wine, of course. He's become more than just my lawyer, he's my anchor in storms I didn't know I was allowed to step out of. My sister Nadia flew in from Florida with her boyfriend. She used to worry about me. Now she just hugs me longer and smiles wider. We sat around the table, my table, and passed plates without judgment, without tension, without pretending. It wasn't fancy. No caterers. No floral arrangements. No performance. Just laughter, real stories, and clean plates. Sometime after dessert, Theo leaned back in his chair and asked the question I knew was coming. "Do you ever hear from Adeline's family anymore?" The room got quiet. Not uncomfortably, just curiously. Everyone looked at me like they were waiting for some dramatic revelation. I smiled. "Not anymore," I said. I finally got the hint. Laughter followed. Warm and knowing. And that was it. The chapter closed with a single sentence. No rage. No revenge. Just a fact. I hadn't blocked any of them. I hadn't sent cruel messages or broadcasted their downfall. I simply stopped showing up where I wasn't seen. Stopped carrying weight for people who would never lift mine. That was my justice. And it was enough. The next morning, I got up early and went for a walk. There's a trail near the condo that leads down to a quiet park by the water. I go there often now, when I want to think, when I want to feel grounded. There's a bench I like. From there, I can see the reflection of the city skyline on the lake. The same skyline I used to stare at from my office window during sleepless nights, wondering if I was the problem, wondering if maybe I wasn't trying hard enough to earn a seat at their table. But sitting here now, I understand what I didn't then. It was never about trying harder. It was about realizing I was trying for the wrong people. People who mistook kindness for weakness. People who saw silence as consent. People who believed being family meant being owed. I stayed in that system for so long because I thought loyalty meant endurance. But loyalty without respect is just self-abandonment dressed up in polite manners. And I'm not that man anymore. I've rebuilt my world now. Smaller. Tighter. Built not on obligation, but on mutual presence. No more pretending. No more squinting to find value in people who refuse to offer it freely. Sometimes I see glimpses of the Andersons in public posts. Someone tags Mason in a group photo or Mira uploads a story about her wedding planning struggles. I scroll past. Not with bitterness. With disinterest. They live in a chapter I've already closed. Adeline. She tried reaching out a few more times. Once through email. Another time through a letter she dropped off at the front desk. I read the first paragraph. That was enough. The rest I let go unread. She said she missed me. But really, she missed the convenience I offered. The quiet man in the background, solving problems without being seen. That version of me is gone. Buried beneath every unpaid debt, every inside joke that left me out, every party I funded but was never truly invited to. And what replaced him? A man who smiles when his phone is quiet. A man who eats alone when necessary and never feels alone. A man who hosts dinners around tables he built, chairs he chose, with people who show up without needing to be convinced to care. So if anyone ever asks what happened to me, where I went, why I don't speak, why I never returned, I'll say this: I didn't leave with anger. I left with clarity. And when they finally realized what I carried, I was already gone.